Och den första föreläsningen idag, då är vi tillbaka i Norge igen. Eller åtminstone mentalt sett så är vi tillbaka i Norge. Det är ju trevligt att ni är på plats här. Trygve Stølan och Veronica Bluementhal. Och Trygve, du har varit en aktiv del i KLIPP-projektet också, vet jag, som en av
Ja, jeg har vært med i KLIPP-prosjektet sammen med Pernilla siden februar, 2,5 år siden.
Ja.
Så det har vært väldigt spännande.
Ja, men det förstår jag verkligen. Ja. En viktig pusselbit för att ta hand om alla de här möjligheterna som vi ska prata om idag nu då, det är ju det här med att ha hållbara affärsmodeller. Och jag vet att ni har gjort ett antal workshops i Norge och kommit fram till spännande resultat. Och de ska vi få höra mer om nu. Varsågoda.
Takk for det, og benytter anledningen til å takke for i går. Veldig hyggelig middag, og bli kjent med mange nye mennesker. Det er alltid bra, og forslaget om å alternere litt, og etter middagen var smart, og også det som Pernilla sa, at alle skulle presentere seg litt. Da ble det litt mer åpent, og man husket i hvert fall noen flere navn, og ble kjent med flere, og det er viktig. For noe av det vi skal ta opp, det er faktisk det å bli bedre kjent i bransjen og samarbeide mer. Men det kommer vi mer tilbake til. Først så skal vi si litt om hvem vi er. Jeg heter altså Trygve, og jeg jobber på Høgskolen i Innlandet. Og det ser vi at Innlandet, det er de to grønne fylkene som før het Hedmark, som grenser inn mot svenskegrensen. Her er Trysil og Selen. Eller her er Trysil, og Selen er her. Og så slo vi sammen Oppland og Hedmark til et nytt fylke for noen år tilbake som heter Innlandet. Og Høgskolen Innlandet har 6 campus, Evenstad, Rena, hvor jeg jobber, Elverum, Blæstad, Hamar og Lillehammer. Før jeg begynte å undervise, så vil jeg også bare si at jeg jobbet i industrien i Norge og i Nederland i svært mange år. Og jeg har også vært, og er gründer selv også, så jeg kjenner litt på de samme problemene som vi skal prate om. Det er også selvopplevd. Veronica, skal du si litt om deg selv?
Ja, jeg hilste jo på mange i går da, men Veronica Bluementhal heter jeg. Jeg jobber som seniorforsker på Høgskolen Innlandet. Har ikke noe gründererfaring selv. Og bakgrunnen min er egentlig hovedsakelig innen reiseliv og regional utvikling, så det er utviklingsperspektivet som jeg på en måte kan da, mens insekter for meg er litt sånn ny og spennende arena.
Ja.
Og så har vi jo med oss Vindi som sitter her oppe, som har vært viktig for kommunikasjonen i prosjektet og spre det på den norske siden av grensa også.
Yes. Hva skal vi snakke om? Vi skal snakke om altså det vi har gjort, spesielt med disse workshopene. Og hvordan har vi kommet frem til dette verdigrunnlaget. Og så skal vi si noe om hva er det som er de bærekraftige forretningsmodellene. Litt om hva som de workshopene har kommet frem til, og litt om hva er det gjeldende teori sier.
Yes, så før vi liksom begynner med resultatene, så skal jeg bare si kort hva det er vi faktisk har gjort. For den måten vi har jobbet på er at vi har lyst til å få frem ulike perspektiver fra Nå kommer jeg på at vi egentlig ble enige om at vi skulle gjøre det her på engelsk. Skulle vi ikke det?
Jo, du kan snakke engelsk, og jeg gjorde om presentasjonen litt i morges og la inn en del engelske slider for å gjøre det enklere for de andre, men snakk gjerne på engelsk.
Well, switch to English then, because I know we have some English speakers in the audience and our slides are in Norwegian. But yeah, so we conducted 3 co-design workshops, meaning that we invited different actors from the insect industry as well as the government, potential clients, insect producers, to get different perspectives out. And we called these workshops one that was between both Sweden and Norway, so we had both representatives, and trying to get not like we are asking you, but to get a discussion going, to try to get different perspectives out. So we had one on values across the borders, and then we had one with Swedish actors and then with Norwegian actors, focusing on best case scenarios, like what is the best case scenario for the insect industry and how do we get there? And as well, the flip side of that, the worst case scenarios, where we definitely don't want to end up and how we avoid getting there. And not from, like, we have the answers to that, but the shared industry perspective on that. So, yeah. So, starting straight to just what were the common values that we identified through these workshops. And I've created this little blob here illustrating some of the points that came up. Sustainability, obviously, was an important, I would say, a core part of the values shared by all actors. But there's also different aspects. For example, there is a strong orientation towards and willingness to change, like a change orientation, as well as a propensity for wanting to think new and think new ways, different paths. So courage was kind of a value that kept coming up. So the courage to change, the courage to think differently, which we all know this is an innovative industry. We're kind of at the forefront here, so it's maybe not so surprising. And related to sustainability is also this future orientation. We're thinking about the future. This is not just solving something here and now. We're thinking about the future and future generations. And connected to that is this long-term thinking. We're thinking over the long term, although I know, Nils, you're getting sick of waiting for the long-term results. But this long-term focus that we're doing things now for seeing things happening 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line. There was also a strong regional or local focus, meaning that we wanted to people wanted to achieve cooperation locally, using local resources, producing for the local market, which is also connected to this other blob we have here on food security and self-sufficiency, which are closely related, because as was mentioned yesterday, that here in Scandinavia we might not have the highest self-sufficiency levels. Which insects can be a part of the solution for that. There's also a strong orientation towards knowledge, which I've seen over the days here, that there's a focus on wanting to generate knowledge, to build this industry on knowledge and research, that we're using knowledge and sharing knowledge to build the industry. Another thing related to that is cooperation, wanting to cooperate, wanting competitors, wanting more people to work together and exchange ideas rather than thinking competition and being focused on the self, but more on cooperation. And another point, which I think everyone here also agrees, that seeing insects not just as a replacement, like an okay alternative to meat or an okay alternative to existing fertilizers, but actually seeing insects as something that should add value, is a more valuable resource, it's not just a replacement. And of those values, it was by far sustainability, cooperation, and this courage and willingness to change that seem to be kind of the core values of the industry, which can be important to keep in mind when we're moving on to some of these sustainable business models.
What is sustainable business models? We can start with how this started in Norway many years ago. In 1987, it was a commission called the Brundtland Commission. And Brundtland is Gro Harlem Brundtland. She was the prime minister in Norway from 81 to 85 and then 2 times more. And she is a doctor, and she was also the woman in Norway that started the campaign for stop smoking. And if you see in Europe, I think it's a lot of countries that have stopped the smoking. It's not allowed to smoke in Norway and in Sweden and all over Europe, more or less. So she started that. And this Brundtland Commission was in 1987. And it's still actual, relevant. But 1987 is more or less 45 years ago, or 35 years ago. It's a long way. It's a long time since. And if you look down there, it's the cross-generational justice. And this is what all the young people in Norway are afraid of, that our generation shall use all the values in Norway instead of using less, so there is something left for them when they grow up. And we see that in the politics, especially in the MDG. MDG, what is that in English? The party?
The Green Party.
The Green Party, yes. They are very upset on this. So it started 35 years ago. Here you can read more about Gro Harlem Brundtland. She's still active, not so much. She's 83 years now. And she has retired from politics, but she's still asking for advice. So now we are talking about what are we doing with a sustainable business model. We can use it in English. We have today's business model as we know it today. And then what shall we do? We want to have more sustainable business model in the future. And then we have to make a lot of implementation of changes. And that seems to be quite easy, but it's not. It's a long process, which is very challenging, and it's very time-consuming. We use a lot of time to make all these changes. If you look at Gro Harlem Brundtland, started in the Brundtland Commission in '87, and still all the European countries are discussing what to do. It's very difficult, even in little Norway, to be enige,
Agree.
to have a common agreement about what to do, about sustainability. We have that problem in Norway, and maybe you have it in Sweden too, and you have it all over in Europe. So all these implementations of changes takes a lot of time. And we are not talking about being sustainable. We are talking about being more sustainable, bit by bit. Every year we shall be a little bit more than we were last year. And of course, we have to increase the sustainability and also the profitability. And I will come back to that later on. There is a professor at Harvard, Eccles. He made this model. And it's more or less the same. We start with your today corporate identity, and then we have to make changes. And what he is studying is actually what kind of culture should we have in this company to have the possibilities to do changes. And then especially capacity for transformational change. You must have the power, and you must have the trust. You must use all you know about innovation, and you must have the capacity to do the changes. Because the changes are difficult to do in short time. And we have also another model from a Norwegian company, Sveinung Jørgensen and Lars-Erik Tynnes Pedersen. Sveinung Jørgensen, he's a colleague at Høgskolen Innlandet. They have more or less the same model. So then we should talk about the triple bunnlinje, a triple bottom line. Of course, all companies want to have profitability, that's for sure. But you must have another bottom line, that's the social, or you can call it the people. And you have the environmental bottom line. All these must be in plus. Before you have all people that are running a company, they are thinking about the profitability. But now you must think about the sustainability and also the people. People, planet, and profits. And in Norway, all companies, not today, but in short time, all companies must report on all these three bottom lines: profit, planet, and people. Because, and also the youngsters in Norway, they're talking about what kind of company will I work in? I'm not only interested in the profits, or not only the planet, but also what does it mean for me? I want to work in a company that are thinking in the long term about the planet. So this is quite important.
All right.
Okay.
So, after a little bit of a theoretical introduction from Trygve, we're moving back to the results that came up during the workshop. And starting out on the positive note about the best case and where we want to be and how to go there. And it turned out that there was kind of a division, which maybe some of you also sensed yesterday, that there's a division between those who think the best case is when insects are only used for human consumption. Direct consumption, humans eating insects as food, while there's another half, or not necessarily a half, but that sees insects as something that should be both human consumption and for animal fodder. There's also a similar division in terms of the value I mentioned about insects being quality products that add more value rather than just replace. Everyone agrees that insects is a high quality product and should be a high quality product. But how is a little bit of a divisive issue, it would seem, from the workshop. That should it be, the approach be to make insects a high quality exclusive product that is valuable but sold in a limited way? Or should we go the other way, where we introduce insects to the market through mass production and selling it cheap and using that as a way to get access to the market and get people more willing to try it? I'm not saying there's a correct answer to that, but it's just there is a division in terms of what the future should bring. However, there's a lot of things that people agree on where we should go, including turning insects into a trend food. Because as a lot of us discussed yesterday, that there's still that like ick factor related to insects in Norway and Sweden, in the Western markets. But there are other products that have taken a similar journey. For example, sushi, which is now something you can find on every street corner. But it's not that long ago that the idea of eating raw fish was a little bit disturbing for some people. And we've seen it with other types of food as well, like mushrooms, I've learned, was something that was introduced. So back in the way back in the day, of course, mushrooms wasn't considered a food. But as many of us enjoyed some very nice cantaloups yesterday, it has become an accepted food. And so in a best case scenario, we have managed to overcome this barrier, and insects is now a trend food. Another important thing that there was agreement about was that insect production in a best case scenario in the future should contribute to solve important societal challenges, which is related to this value of sustainability, right? The insects production should contribute to reduce to circularity by using waste products. It should contribute to create a more sustainable future, and not just by being sustainable in itself, but also helping make other industries more sustainable. For example, by contributing to animal farming becoming more sustainable by relying less on soy imported from Brazil, for example. And this sustainability should go through all parts of the process, so not just the production, using waste as fodder, but also that the waste from the insects themselves, frass, is being used, and that we use sustainable sources for energy consumption, so that it's sustainability in the whole process, also selling to the local markets and not just becoming one of the long-distance exporters. Another issue also which relates to cooperation, is the importance of having different specialized actors involved who work closely together. Because right now, a lot of people are sitting and trying to do everything for themselves, which they kind of have to because there's not that many specialized actors. You have to work on both production and working on developing the market and marketing and selling and figure out which fodder you can use and all these things. And in an ideal future, we have specialized actors. We have people who work with production. We have people who only work with sales, and we have people who work only with equipment, for example. And another best case scenario, which is no surprise, as it was also brought up a lot yesterday, was the rules and regulations. They are now, in some places, hindering our development, while in the future it needs to be clear, easy to understand, and help facilitate the development of this industry, and not, as it currently is kind of now, hindering it. Yeah, and another thing that was common agreed upon was the need for an active industry organization that could both contribute to foster cooperation, knowledge sharing, but also to lobby towards the government in terms of bettering the regulations, bettering the laws, also contributing to better, because right now there's issues related to importing insects and exporting them across the border, as well as waste flows for insects production. And also to, as we have seen here today, that there are people here who are interested in joining the industry and starting up and having a strong, active industry organization that can help newcomers by bringing them in and putting them in touch with established actors is also an important road to succeed this cooperative best case scenario in the future. And also, a little bit harking back to that discussion on insects as food versus insects as fodder, that it's important to work with clear market segments. During one of the design workshops, one of the informants brought this picture. It was of a lasagna, looking good, except it was produced by Colgate. And for me, instantly, I now think that this lasagna tastes like toothpaste. And that is something that was a little bit on this issue of best case, worst case, that if people start to associate insects with animal fodder, and we use the same, if there's not these clear market segments and clear branding, we can have this almost an opposite effect where insects become even more of a barrier to eat because people associate it with fodder. Of course, there's ways to work around that, but yeah. Yes. So that brings me a little bit over to the flip side of this, the worst case scenario, so where we absolutely don't want to end up and how we avoid ending up there. And one of those things is that the big fear, right, is that the introduction of insects as animal food in Sweden and Norway becomes a negative thing, that the products that are delivered are not received well. Maybe people don't think they taste well, or there's this ick factor that we're not able to overcome, or the issues with that we develop business models that it becomes such a strong fodder thing in people's heads that it doesn't work. Or, as it was also mentioned, this worry that a crisis can happen, something can go wrong, a batch of insects ends up by accident to become dangerous to eat. And we have this crisis in an early phase where people are still a bit skeptical, which could be kind of devastating for a starting industry. Which is, again, the importance of knowledge and cooperation to avoid something like this can happen. And again, the flip side, again, a worst case scenario if we fail to succeed in these cooperations. If we don't manage to, for example, if equipment providers are not interested in providing equipment for our industry because it's considered too small, or if the farming policies work against the insect industry, we will really have a problem, because that can stagnate the growth and hinder this ability to grow and have more specialized providers. And another worst case, which we also talked about yesterday, that some had a bit different solutions to, but that there can be a challenge in the future if the waste flows are reduced, as insect production largely, there's a wish that the insect production is based on waste material. And it could be, of course, people waste less, which would be great, but would also reduce the inflow of waste. Or it could simply be that there are other competitors who also are interested in the same waste flows as we are, and then we could lose access to that resource. And another worst case, given that sustainability is so important, is that the industry takes a bad turn and ends up developing in a non-sustainable direction. And that could be multiple ways. For example, that insects end up using human foods as insect fodder. That would be something people agree is the wrong direction or a bad way. Or that it becomes a socially unsustainable business that is dependent on cheap foreign labor or bad working conditions, or that we are, instead of being co-located with waste producers, that waste is being transported over long distances, or the finished product is transported over long distances. Yeah, and I just really like this quote from one of the informants who said that worst case scenario is that I'm stuck in the forest alone, just like I am right now. So that in the future, it's again building an industry, building infrastructure around it, not just insect producer, but all the other parts of the industry that we need to be there. And yeah, as I mentioned, with this bureaucratic hindrances or other important actors closing the doors to us, whether that be equipment deliverers or grocery stores refusing to take the products. And other bad thing would be where we are right now. Not because there's anything wrong with where we are right now, but we all agree that we want to upscale and we want to move on. So staying where we are or downgrading would be a worst case scenario. And finally, that price becomes the most important value. As we saw in the values people shared, sustainability was so important. And there was a fear that in the hunt for profit, that we end up being on an unsustainable path.
Okay. The next point is hvordan henger den teorien som forskerne har kommet frem til, og de store teoretikerne på dette fagfeltet, hvordan henger det sammen med det vi har funnet ut i workshopen? Og hvis vi ser på en professor fra Harvard, så sier han hva er det som kjennetegner de som jobber med bærekraftig utvikling, hva er det som kjennetegner de sammenlignet med ordinære virksomheter. Og det står her, han hadde en undersøkelse, en survey fra 2012 som still is relevant. Og det han fant ut, sustainable organizations are effective at engaging with external stakeholders and employees. Så det betyr at de er flinke til å få med seg alle de som er nødvendige i omgivelsene. Myndigheter, leverandører, de som har interesse av det vi holder på med, og ikke minst ansatte. Og de har en kultur basert på innovasjon og tillit. Altså det er dyktige ledere som får folk med seg, basert på hvordan de opptrer, og deres kunnskapsnivå, og hvor de vil. Og videre så har de også en lang track record på implementering av store endringer. Og vi ser det er mange som er flinke til dette. Og de som er flinke til dette, de lykkes. Men det er en langvarig prosess. Hvor man virkelig må jobbe for å få ikke minst alle ansatte med seg, og så må man få alle de som er i omgivelsene. Alle interessentene til den businessen du holder på med. Og nederst så står det, they have capacity for endringer. Ikke sant? De må ha evnen, og de må ha tålmodigheten og styrken til å jobbe med dette år etter år etter år for å få det til. Det er ikke noe man kan gjøre på en konferanse. Dette er et arbeid, langsiktig arbeid, hvor man må jobbe med alle de man er nødt til å påvirke for å få til et langvarig resultat. Det kan gå tilbake og se på hans modell. Da. Så det våre norske kolleger. De har sagt noe av det samme. De har en bok som heter The Business Model Restart. Og noe av det de har kommet frem til, det står her. Når man vurderer bærekraften i bedrifters forretningsmodeller, det for begrensende å se utelukkende på det som foregår innenfor veggene til den enkelte bedrift. Man kan ikke bare sitte på sitt egen kontor i sin egen fabrikk og tro at man skal løse alt. Prestasjoner av denne typen vanskelig å nå gjennom sololøp, men fordrer i stedet hensiktsmessige allianser mellom bedriftene som sammen kan løse problemer de neppe kan lykkes med å løse alene. Det noe av det aller viktigste. Altså inngå allianser og jobb med de som i hele verdikjeden. I modellen tar vi også den rollen som allianser spiller og muliggjør bærekraftige innovasjoner som går på tvers av organisasjoner. Man klarer altså ikke å gjøre dette helt alene. Dette stemmer veldig godt med det som vi har funnet ut i workshopen. Ja, her den på engelsk. Så avslutningsvis så har vi noen nøkkelord for å lykkes. Det funn altså både fra workshopen og fra teorien. Insekter som menneskemat og fôr. Det liksom de to store markedene. Og så det alt dette med muligheter for resirkulering av avfallsstrømmene, som gir veldig store gevinster. Flere vil satse både små og store aktører. Vi har hørt noen aktører i går, og etterpå skal vi høre en virkelig stor aktør i Norge, en som tenker veldig stort og industrielt. Noen av oss har hørt ham før, og noen kjenner han. Et samarbeid over grensene startet. KLIPP-prosjektet jo et eksempel på et samarbeid over grensene. Og det tror jeg veldig viktig, for både Norge og Sverige egentlig ganske små i det store. Fallgruvene har vi også tydeliggjort. Det mange fallgruver, men når vi får det på trykk, så det lettere å få gjort noe med det. Samarbeid og allianse på tvers av organisasjoner både smart, det ikke bare smart, men det helt nødvendig. Og så det dette siste, det må etablere sterke bransjeorganisasjoner. Du ser på de som lykkes, så har de veldig sterke organisasjoner som du var inne på dette å drive med påvirkning inn mot besluttende myndigheter, mot politikerne, mot omverdenen i det hele tatt. For det må til. Man må være mange for å gjøre disse store endringene. Og så det dette med å skape og utvikle gode bedriftskulturer i hver enkelt virksomhet. Slik at man får alle sammen med seg, ikke bare ledelsen, men de ansatte kanskje det aller viktigste. Og at man jobber innad i alliansene. Her har vi den på engelsk. Nå ser jeg tiden, vi har noen få minutter igjen. Men vi på slutten. For de som vil, så kan man lese mer om dette i noen av disse rapportene. Spørsmål? Urban mat.
Den virker, ja. Jeg synes jo det prosjektet har vært en øyeåpner, og har gitt oss i bransjen et push-up. Jeg var litt skeptisk i starten. Jeg tenkte dette var mye akademiske folk som bare skulle sitte på kontoret sitt og fundere. Men det ble jo ikke sånn. Det har blitt mye bedre, og konferensen jo veldig bra. Så spørsmålet mitt da, vil det fortsette?
Det et godt spørsmål. I går fikk jeg veldig mange tilsvarende spørsmål, og det jeg kan si fra Pernilla og meg, det jo at vi skal jo nå om en uke eller to, eller neste uke, begynne å skrive sluttrapporten. Og det nok et stort ønske fra mange av dere i salen om at vi fortsetter. Det jo et spørsmål som ikke vi kan si ja eller nei på. Men jeg kunne ønske alle velkommen til en konferanse i Trysil om 1 år, i september 2023. Det hadde vært morsomt. Fordi bransjen trenger å møtes. Og du har jo nevnt det mange ganger. Og ut fra all teori, hva forskerne også sier, så må man jobbe sammen. Så dette er ikke noe man klarer å gjøre alene. Så spør du meg, så har jeg lyst til å si ja, men jeg kan ikke si ja formelt. Skal du? Nei.
But I was thinking this insect industry, it's also competing with some of the existing industries that we have. Do you found that anyone is against this? So like some people don't want the insect industry to succeed?
I haven't heard that, but I heard a lot about, I don't know anything about the insects industry. What is that? It's, I don't believe in it. It's because they
but that's
don't...
different, I guess.
Yes, that's...
But there is some skepticism about it, without necessarily that we dived into where that comes from. But I mean, in Norway at least, it's kind of a saying that the farming industry is a little bit on the back wheel. They're a little bit slow on the change. And I think the resistance maybe comes a little bit just from the idea of change, because tradition is so strong and insects production is so different in many ways that I think it's more of a skepticism than that they're trying to work against it, though.
Oh, maybe they think that this shall take over for the traditional.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Maybe someone thinks that.
It's not that. It's on the top, on the plus.
Okay, good.
Together.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about cooperation and how important it is to work together. But how do you get people to join? Did you talk to these focus groups about that in the workshops?
I would say Pernille and Trygve has done a massive job of a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails and kind of also introducing the project and this way of working as I think the insect industry is quite forward-thinking and open to a cooperation, but for those who maybe are switching from another industry and getting used to this way of having to work together, I think, and also a lot of you are busy, setting off time to participate in these kind of things is maybe not always on the top priority list.
No.
So, some convincing, I think, was needed, right?
But do you feel like it's kind of a momentum right now, that something is happening?
Yes. If you look at the engagement at this conference and before, a lot of people wanted to be here, but they couldn't get the time to come here. And I think it's a kind of momentum. So it's important to think, what shall we do the next?
It's very exciting. We look forward to the conference next year.
Yes.
We need to keep the energy that's been here.
And everyone is coming, right? They're very quiet, but Yes. The microphone. Oh.
Well, I mean, first, she's
okay. You first.
Thanks so much for a very interesting presentation. My name is Kamli Magnussen. I'm coming from Invest in Dalarna, Region Dalarna. My questions is how can we find the people to work in this industry, which is so new, like a lot of things that are involved, like the competencies and certain skill set, and people who are ready to work with, for example, like mealworms. Do you think there's a challenge finding competencies and people?
Will you answer?
Yeah, because there was two things that kind of came up also during the workshops. One was that of starting early, working with schools, as we have some representatives here, to introduce insects as human food at an early age, and also introducing it as a way of farming at an age where people are more open maybe, and trying to start recruitment by just sharing knowledge. And knowledge was another thing that kept coming up from the workshop. The people's experience was that it was easier to convince partners or equipment developers if they had concrete if it was research that they could show that using FRAS led to better quality products, that knowledge and research was one of those ways to convince people, because it's one thing to be enthusiastic about something, but if you can actually put the hard data there, it's easier to recruit partners. I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
Can I ask Nils, how difficult or how easy is it to get people into this industry? You have a lot of colleagues here today. Just a short answer, please.
It's both hard and easy to find the competences. It's very interesting, intriguing, and it's also in a startup. It's an unsecure world, being in a part of being in a startup. But I'm very, very satisfied with all the people that are joining and feeling this is a very the main common goal among the staff is that we do this together, and it's we have a lot of applications. So for the moment, I would say it's not the biggest hurdle to find people. But it's still specific competences, like really into the insect industry, is something that the universities isn't teaching out as much as we would like.
Yet.
Okay, thanks.
So the last question.
Thank you. It's a question, a comment. It's a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. And actually very interesting, this opposition between feed and food. I didn't think about it previously, but actually when I'm thinking about how people still perceiving corn, for example in France, some people still refuse to eat it because it's for livestock, it's not for humans. So it's actually a very pertinent remark that you've made, and we really need to take it into account when working with the insect industry. And also another point is that there are some parts of the world where insects are used to be consumed by humans. But it's still considered like a transitional food, let's say. For example, there have been some studies made in Thailand where people used to eat insects, but when they are getting wealthier, when they are getting into the cities and so on, they're starting to consume, I would say, regular meat. And we do not want to return back to the insect because it's kind of a lifestyle, it's not the same social acceptance and so on. So it's also a very interesting point that we need to work on. We need to kind of develop a cuisine around those insects, because again, when thinking about the French gastronomy, eating snails, frogs, shells, and so on, it's only because of starving. You wouldn't even dare eat this if you wouldn't be starving. And it's something which is very important, because now it's considered like a high cuisine, very much of gastronomy, but it's because of starving we started to eat frogs.
Thank you. And thank you to you too